Ryan, my younger brother, had always been the golden child of our family. While I was left to figure out life on my own, he enjoyed all the comforts and privileges Mom had to offer. She cooked his favorite meals, did his laundry, and always found a way to shift responsibilities onto me. When Ryan struggled with schoolwork, I was the one expected to help, because, according to Mom, we're family. But when I needed anything, emotional support, guidance, or even help with my own problems, there was no one in sight. From the beginning, Ryan understood his role and took full advantage of it. He was loud, reckless, and always seemed to get away with everything. Mom adored his wildness and energy, while I, quiet, bookish, and reserved, was seen as cold or too serious. It felt like no matter what I did, I was always in his shadow. It wasn't just favoritism, it was the emotional distance between us. I dreamed of having a family that would see and support me. But instead, I lived with the constant sting of Ryan's jokes and teasing. He mocked me for my height, my glasses, and anything that made me different. I remember the humiliation when he stole my journal and read it out loud to Mom, exposing all my personal thoughts. Instead of scolding him, she laughed it off, calling it just brotherly fun. As the years went by, the teasing only escalated. Ryan's pranks turned from childish to mean-spirited, like the time he put stones in my cereal or almost broke my glasses. But the worst part was at school. Ryan not only ignored the bullies who tormented me, he actively encouraged them. They called me names like Four Eyes and Loser, and Ryan made sure they never ran out of insults. The emotional abuse reached its peak when, during a particularly heated argument, Ryan looked me in the eye and said, "You should just kill yourself." Those words hit harder than any punch. I was already battling depression, and hearing that from my brother was a crushing blow. I told Mom about what Ryan had said, hoping she would finally intervene. But she dismissed it, saying I was being too sensitive and that boys would be boys. It felt like I was drowning and no one even noticed. Then, one day, Ryan crossed a line that forced Dad to finally act. We had been arguing over something trivial, and out of nowhere, Ryan lit a match and tried to set my hair on fire. I could feel the heat on the back of my head, panic gripping my chest. Dad, who had been absent most of the time due to work, walked in just as it happened. For the first time, Ryan faced real consequences. Dad grabbed him by the arm and gave him a cold, serious warning. If he ever did anything like that again, Dad would call the police. Ryan, usually so cocky and untouchable, stood frozen in shock. He wasn't used to facing punishment. That evening, Dad came to my room for a rare heart-to-heart conversation. He admitted that he had hoped Ryan would mature on his own, but now he knew that wasn't going to happen. I poured my heart out to him, sharing all the pain I had carried for years, the bullying, the loneliness, the sense of being invisible in my own family. The next day, Dad went to my school and spoke with the principal to address the bullying. Afterward, he told me he had enrolled me in MMA classes at a local gym. I remember thinking how ridiculous it sounded. How could someone like me, quiet and reserved, fit into a world of fighters? But Dad insisted it was time I learned to stand up for myself. At first, the training felt overwhelming. I wasn't just learning how to throw punches, I was learning how to trust myself. Session after session, I grew stronger, not just physically but emotionally. I discovered a sense of confidence I never thought I had. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could protect myself. I wasn't just surviving, I was learning how to fight back. When I left for university, it felt like I was finally escaping the toxic environment that had weighed me down for so long. The distance gave me the freedom to breathe, and for the first time, I wasn't living in Ryan's shadow. Life was mine to build, and I intended to do just that. University was a breath of fresh air for me. Finally, I had escaped the toxic family dynamics that had weighed me down for so long. Each day felt like a step toward building my own life, away from Ryan's shadow. In my second year, I met Emma at a party, and from the first conversation we clicked. She was kind, easy to talk to, and it felt like she understood me in ways no one ever had. Emma came from a religious family, and when we discovered she was pregnant during our final year, we decided to get married as soon as we graduated. Our wedding wasn't extravagant, just a small ceremony with close friends and family, but it felt perfect. For the first time in my life, it seemed like everything was falling into place. I had a wife I loved, and I was excited to become a father. I was deeply committed to Emma and the life we were building together. Over the years, other women had shown interest in me, but I never pursued them. I was content with Emma, believing wholeheartedly in the dream of a monogamous relationship where we could raise our child and grow old together. But the cracks in that dream began to show much sooner than I realized. At first, it was subtle. Emma started working longer hours and attending more work events. I didn't think much of it, chalking it up to career demands. One night, she came home late, smelling faintly of cologne. When I asked about it, she laughed it off, saying it was from a crowded elevator. I believed her, or at least I convinced myself I did. At a family gathering a few months later, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Ryan was there, as charming as ever, and Emma seemed unusually comfortable around him. They laughed at inside jokes, and I felt like an outsider in my own marriage. When I asked Emma about it later, she assured me that she was just trying to get along with my family, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Over the next few months, small things began to pile up. Emma's phone was always on silent when she was around me. Once, when I glanced at her screen, she snatched it away with a nervous laugh, saying she was planning a surprise for me. I didn't press further, not wanting to seem paranoid. But the unease in my gut never went away. Then came the night that changed everything. Emma told me she had a business trip and wouldn't be back until the next day. Something didn't feel right, so I checked the work calendar she kept on her desk. There was no mention of any trip. I stared at the calendar, trying to make sense of it. Instead of confronting her, I told myself I had to trust her. I wanted so badly to believe in our marriage. The final straw came when Emma suggested that Ryan join us for more family activities. She said it would help us bond as brothers, but every time Ryan was around, I felt increasingly sidelined. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, but the way they interacted only deepened my suspicions. 3 months ago, Emma finally confessed the truth, shattering everything. She admitted that her affair with Ryan had started years ago during a holiday stay with my family. It began innocently, with conversations and shared sympathy, but soon it crossed a line. They ended the affair after the holiday, but not before Emma found out she was pregnant. She admitted that she didn't know if the child was mine or Ryan's. Her confession left me numb. The life I thought I had built, the marriage, the child, suddenly felt like a lie. I asked Emma why she stayed with me if she still had feelings for Ryan. She hesitated before admitting that she didn't want to be the one to break up our marriage. She thought I was a wonderful father and believed I was the more dependable brother, so she married me instead of Ryan. Her excuses felt hollow. I realized that even if I could forgive her, I would never forget. I told her as calmly as I could that our marriage was over. Emma cried, begging me to reconsider for the sake of our child, but I knew it was too late. The betrayal was too deep. Leaving Emma after her confession was one of the hardest decisions I'd ever made. But I knew that staying in a marriage built on lies would only destroy me further. That night, I packed a bag and checked into a nearby hotel, needing space to think. Emma tried to call, leaving message after message, begging me to come home. She promised we could work things out, but I didn't respond. The betrayal was too deep, and I knew that no apology could fix it. The next morning, I contacted a divorce lawyer. I explained everything, Emma's affairs, the years of deception, and the fact that my brother might be the father of the boy I had raised. My lawyer was calm but direct. We need a paternity test. If the child is Ryan's, it will impact the financial and custody arrangements. Hearing those words was like a punch to the gut. The idea that the boy might not be mine felt unbearable. I had been there for every milestone, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. How could he not be my son? Emma's lawyer fought back hard, demanding alimony and making it clear that she expected financial support. But my lawyer had a trump card, her infidelity. Emma's affair with my brother gave us leverage. While the thought of a legal battle was exhausting, I knew I had to fight, for my future and for my peace of mind. Waiting for the paternity test results was agonizing. Every time I looked at a picture of the boy, my heart ached. I wanted him to be mine, to prove that the love I had given him wasn't misplaced. But when the results came back, the truth hit me like a freight train. Ryan was the biological father. The room spun as I processed the reality. The boy I had loved with all my heart wasn't mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the test results, tears streaming down my face. Every memory, his first steps, his first words, felt like a cruel joke. Emma begged me not to walk away from him. "He still loves you," she said, her voice breaking. "He doesn't understand any of this. You're his father, Mark." But I couldn't do it. Every time I looked at him, I saw Ryan. The pain was too raw. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. Emma's dreams of alimony were shattered, thanks to the evidence of her affair. My lawyer ensured that the financial settlement was minimal, and I walked away with most of my savings intact. But the victory felt hollow. No amount of money could heal the wounds left by Emma's betrayal. The day I signed the divorce papers, I felt a strange sense of freedom. I moved into a new apartment, a space that was entirely mine. For the first time in years, I was free from the weight of pretending that everything was fine. But the silence was deafening, and the pain lingered. Emma continued to send me messages and photos of the boy, trying to keep me involved in his life. I wanted to respond, to be there for him, but I knew I wasn't ready. The wounds were still fresh, and I couldn't pretend that everything was okay. Ryan, meanwhile, was struggling. He had dropped out of college and was living with Emma, working part-time as a mechanic. The golden child of our family had fallen hard, and no one was rushing to pick him up. Family members occasionally mentioned him in passing, but I made it clear that I didn't want updates. Ryan was a closed chapter. Adjusting to life on my own was harder than I anticipated. At first, I thought freedom would feel like a release, a chance to finally live without lies or betrayals. But instead, it felt hollow. The silence in my apartment was oppressive, and at night, loneliness wrapped itself around me like a suffocating blanket. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had fallen apart. The betrayal by Emma and Ryan still gnawed at me. I often found myself replaying old conversations, analyzing every detail, every glance they exchanged, every excuse Emma made. I realized how blind I had been, how desperately I wanted to believe in my family, even when the truth was right in front of me. I tried drowning myself in work, but the emptiness followed me everywhere. That's when I knew I needed help. Therapy wasn't just a suggestion, it was a necessity. Week after week, I sat across from my therapist, unraveling the mess inside me. It wasn't just about Emma or Ryan, it was about years of unresolved pain, the favoritism I had endured, and the feeling of never being enough. At first, it was overwhelming, like picking at an old wound. But slowly I began to find clarity. I realized that I had spent my life seeking validation from people who would never give it to me. And it was time to stop. One unexpected bright spot during this dark time was my father. Our relationship, once distant and cold, began to shift. We started golfing together every weekend. At first, it was awkward, just two men avoiding the past. But over time, it became something I looked forward to. On the golf course, there were no lies or betrayals, just quiet companionship. My mother, however, struggled. I could see the guilt in her eyes, guilt for enabling Ryan, for overlooking my pain. She missed him, despite everything he had done, but she knew better than to reach out. The ultimatum from my father was clear. If she contacted Ryan, she would have to leave with him. For the first time in my life, she chose me. News of Ryan trickled in through the family grapevine. He had dropped out of college, unable to keep up without our parents' financial support. He was living with Emma, working part-time as a mechanic, barely scraping by. The golden boy who had always gotten his way was now facing the harsh reality of his own choices. I didn't take any pleasure in his downfall. If anything, I felt a strange mix of pity and relief. Pity, because I knew he had never learned to stand on his own. Relief, because for the first time, his life was no longer entangled with mine. Emma kept sending photos of the boy, trying to keep me connected. Each time, I hesitated before deleting the messages. I wanted to respond. I wanted to be there for the child I had once called my own. But every time I looked at his face, I saw Ryan. The pain was still too fresh. One night, after a particularly difficult therapy session, I found myself driving aimlessly through the city. Without realizing it, I ended up near Emma's apartment. I parked a block away, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to confront her, to demand answers she could never give. But another part of me knew it wouldn't change anything. I sat in the car for what felt like hours, wrestling with my emotions. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages Emma had sent. There was one, a photo of the boy holding a school project with a proud smile on his face. Beneath it, Emma had written, "He misses you. He asks about you every day." Tears welled up in my eyes. I wanted to be part of his life, but I wasn't ready. I knew that stepping back into his world without fully healing would only cause more damage. I saved the photo and put the phone away, promising myself that maybe, someday, I would reach out. But not today. The days began to blur into weeks, and slowly, life started to feel manageable again. I threw myself into new hobbies. Photography became my escape, and I found peace behind the lens. Capturing the world through photos felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been lost. I also joined a local hiking group, immersing myself in nature and meeting new people along the way. Each small victory, each hike, each photo, felt like a step toward healing. The shadows of my past no longer felt as overwhelming. They were still there, but they no longer controlled me. One afternoon, as I was wrapping up a photography session, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my father. "I've changed the will. Ryan gets nothing. It's all going to you." I stared at the message, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. For years, I had lived in Ryan's shadow, believing I would never be enough in my parents' eyes. And now, my father was offering me everything. Not long after, Ryan called me. His voice was desperate, a far cry from the confident brother I once knew. "Emma's coming after me for child support," he said. "I can't afford school without help. Can you talk to Dad?" I couldn't help but laugh. A bitter, exhausted laugh. "These are the consequences of your actions, Ryan," I said. "You made your choices. Now you live with them." Ryan tried to argue, shifting the blame to Emma. "She's just as guilty as I am," he insisted. "Maybe she is," I replied coldly. "But I divorced her. She's your problem now." He raised his voice, but I cut him off. "You're not the golden child anymore, Ryan. You're the black sheep, and no one's coming to save you." I ended the call and blocked his number. From that moment on, Ryan no longer existed in my life. Returning to my apartment after blocking Ryan's number, I felt a strange sense of relief. The emotional burden that I had carried for so many years, trying to keep the family together, always being the responsible one, was finally lifted. I no longer felt obligated to save Ryan from himself. But as freeing as it was, it also left a void. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself deeper into my new life. I signed up for more hiking trips, enrolled in an advanced photography class, and began building a portfolio. Slowly, I started making connections with people who shared my passions. It felt good to belong somewhere, even if it was still unfamiliar. But healing wasn't a straight path. Some nights, the loneliness hit harder than others. I found myself scrolling through old photos of the boy, wondering if I had made the right decision to cut ties. His innocent smile haunted me. He wasn't responsible for the mistakes of the adults around him. Yet, every time I thought about reaching out, the memories of betrayal held me back. I knew I needed to move forward, not just for myself, but for the life I wanted to build. Therapy sessions became less about dissecting the past and more about planning the future. My therapist helped me see that I had been living for others for too long. First my family, then Emma and the boy. It was time to live for myself. One day, during a photography exhibit I had helped organize, I met someone. Her name was Lauren, and she had a quiet, calming presence. We talked about art, nature, and travel, and for the first time in a long while, I felt comfortable around someone new. We exchanged numbers and agreed to grab coffee sometime. It wasn't a grand romantic moment. There were no sparks flying or instant connections, but it felt good. It felt real. I wasn't rushing into anything, just taking things slow, one step at a time. Life continued to surprise me in small ways. My relationship with my father remained steady, We kept up our weekly golf outings, and each time, the conversations flowed a little easier. There was no need to dwell on the past. We both knew it was there, but we had learned to coexist with it. My mother, meanwhile, stayed true to her word. She never reached out to Ryan, though I could see the sadness in her eyes whenever his name came up. It wasn't easy for her, but for the first time, she put my well-being above her own guilt. Emma, however, didn't let go so easily. She continued to send messages, trying to reconnect, insisting that I reconsider my relationship with the boy. Each message felt like a small wound reopening, but I stood firm. I knew that stepping back into their lives would only bring more pain. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from my lawyer. "We've just received notice from Ryan's attorney," he said. "He's trying to contest the terms of the will." I wasn't surprised. Ryan had always believed that he was entitled to everything, even after everything he had done. But this time I was ready. "I want to fight this," I told my lawyer. Every step of the way. The legal battle that followed was draining, but I refused to back down. For once in my life, I wasn't going to let Ryan take something from me. With the support of my father and the help of a good lawyer, I ensured that Ryan's challenge failed. He walked away with nothing. After the case was closed, my father invited me over for dinner. It was the first family meal we'd had without Ryan, and it felt both strange and peaceful. My father made a toast, just a simple acknowledgement of the progress we had made as a family. "I'm proud of you, son," he said, raising his glass. "You've come a long way." For the first time, I believed him. And more importantly, I believed in myself. Some time passed, and I continued to focus on rebuilding my life. The messages between me and the boy became more frequent. We didn't dive into heavy conversations, just small updates about his day, school projects, and hobbies. It was enough for now. I knew I wasn't ready to fully step back into his life, but these moments gave me hope that perhaps, one day I could. Emma's messages became less intrusive over time. She seemed to understand that the boundaries I had set weren't negotiable. While she occasionally mentioned how hard things were for her and Ryan, I kept my responses polite but distant. I was determined not to get drawn back into their chaos. One evening, during a quiet dinner with Lauren, my phone buzzed with a notification from my father. It was a short text, but it carried immense weight. "Ryan showed up at the house today. We didn't let him in." I stared at the screen for a long moment, emotions swirling inside me. Ryan was struggling. That much was clear. I had known this would happen eventually. His charm, his carefree attitude, those things could only carry him so far. But knowing that he had turned to our parents for help and been rejected still left a complicated knot in my chest. Lauren noticed my distraction. "Everything okay?" she asked gently. "Ryan tried to see my parents today," I replied quietly. "They turned him away." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "That must be hard to hear." "It is," I admitted. "But it's what needed to happen." The next few weeks were emotionally taxing. Ryan's presence loomed in the background, like a storm cloud on the horizon. I knew he would try to reach out to me eventually, and I prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation. It came one afternoon, when I received an unexpected call from an unknown number. I answered, already knowing who it would be. "Hey," Ryan's voice was hesitant, a far cry from the cocky tone I had grown used to. "I need help, man." There was a time when I would have dropped everything to help him. But that time had passed. "You made your choices, Ryan," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You need to live with them." He tried to argue, to explain how Emma was demanding child support, how he had dropped out of college and couldn't find steady work. But I remained firm. "I'm not your safety net anymore." "Come on, man," Ryan pleaded. "We're brothers." "No, Ryan," I said quietly. "We're not. Not anymore." I ended the call and blocked the number, feeling a strange sense of finality settle over me. The boy I had grown up with, the brother who had once been my closest family, was now just a distant memory, a shadow from a life I had left behind. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made the right choice. Forgiveness had always seemed like the noble thing to do, but sometimes, walking away was the only way to heal. In the weeks that followed, life began to feel lighter. I found joy in the little things: Morning hikes, photography sessions, quiet moments with Lauren. I was learning, slowly but surely, how to live for myself. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. The boy sent me a message. "Would you come to my game next week? I'd really like it if you were there." It was a simple request, but it carried so much weight. I knew that going to his game would be a step toward rebuilding a relationship, one that might never look the same as before, but one that could still matter. After a long moment, I typed out a reply, "I'll be there." The following week, I found myself standing on the sidelines of the boys' soccer game. The field was bustling with energy, parents chatting, kids warming up, and the sound of cleats against the grass. For a moment, I felt out of place, unsure if I belonged here. But when I saw the boy waving at me from across the field, a wide grin on his face, I knew I had made the right choice. The game was a blur of movement and excitement. Every time the boy made a good play, he would glance over to make sure I was watching. I cheered for him, clapping and shouting encouragement, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a genuine connection. After the game, he ran over, breathless and grinning. "Did you see that goal?" he asked, his eyes shining with pride. "I did," I replied, ruffling his hair. "You were amazing out there." His smile widened, and in that moment, I realized something profound. It didn't matter who his biological father was. I was still a part of his life, and that was enough. As we walked toward the parking lot, Emma approached, holding a water bottle. She looked surprised to see me, but her expression softened when she noticed the boy walking beside me. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. I nodded, not trusting myself to say much more. The tension between us was still there, but it no longer consumed me. We exchanged polite goodbyes, and I promised the boy I'd see him soon. Driving home that evening, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. Life wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was starting to feel manageable. I was learning how to live with the scars, without letting them define me. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, life began to regain a sense of normalcy. My routine settled: work, weekends with the boy, occasional hikes with Lauren, and therapy sessions that helped me process the lingering emotions. There were still difficult days, but they came less frequently. The ache of betrayal no longer felt like a gaping wound. It had become more like a scar, a reminder of what I had survived. One evening, while scrolling through my phone, I noticed a message from my father. It was a simple note: "We're proud of you, son. Keep going." Those words hit harder than I expected. I never thought I'd hear such encouragement from him, and in that moment, I realized just how far I'd come, from a boy constantly living in his brother's shadow to a man reclaiming his life. I continued to spend time with the boy, and our bond grew stronger with each passing day. At first, we stuck to simple things: games in the park, movie nights, and soccer practice. But over time, we began having deeper conversations. He asked questions about life, family, and even touched on the topic of his biological father. I answered as honestly as I could, without burdening him with the complicated truth. "You know," he said one day, kicking a soccer ball at my feet, "you're my real dad." His words stopped me in my tracks. I looked at him, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. "And you're my son," I replied softly. In that moment, it didn't matter how he came into my life. What mattered was that we had each other now. Meanwhile, Ryan faded further from our lives. He had stopped reaching out entirely, and the updates from family became less frequent. I no longer felt the need to know what he was doing or how he was managing. He was part of my past, and I had no intention of reopening old wounds. My relationship with Lauren also deepened. We didn't rush anything, taking things one step at a time. She was patient and kind, giving me the space I needed to heal while also standing by my side. With her, I felt a sense of ease that I hadn't known was possible, a relationship built on trust, respect, and genuine companionship. One day, during a quiet walk along the beach, she took my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "I'm proud of you, you know," she said, "for everything you've been through and for who you're becoming." I smiled, feeling a sense of contentment I hadn't experienced in years. "Thank you," I whispered, grateful for her presence in my life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized something important. I wasn't defined by the betrayals of my past. I wasn't the sum of my mistakes or the pain I had endured. I was more than that. I was a father, a friend, and a man learning to live again. Life still had its challenges, but I was no longer afraid of them. I had survived the worst, and now I was ready for whatever came next. With the boy by my side, my relationship with Lauren blossoming, and my own sense of peace growing stronger every day, I knew that my future was mine to shape. And for the first time in a long time, that thought didn't scare me. It filled me with hope. I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for watching my videos, sharing them, and supporting me along the way. Your views, comments, and likes are the driving force behind my passion to create captivating and unexpected stories. Every tale I share is more than just a plot. It's a journey of emotions, lessons, and reflections that we experience together. Your engagement brings life and soul to this channel. Thank you for sticking with me until the very end of each video, because the finale of every story is where the real impact lies. I promise to continue delivering twists and turns that surprise, inspire, and resonate with your hearts.